Before we start, tell us in the comments where you're watching from. What city? What country? Because this is a story from one of the darkest periods in American history. The Reconstruction Era, 1865-1877. When newly freed black people tried to build lives in the South while the Ku Klux Klan waged a terrorist campaign to restore white supremacy through murder, rape, arson, and intimidation. This is the story of a weapon that Klansmen dismissed as primitive, a shepherd's tool, a child's toy. They carried rifles, revolvers, shotguns. They rode in armed groups, wore hoods, operated with impunity because local law enforcement were often Klan members themselves. They believed their guns and their numbers made them invincible. They were wrong. This is the story of Marcus Freeman, a 19-year-old freedman in rural Georgia who learned to use an ancient weapon, the sling, with such deadly precision that he killed 23 Klansmen over 3 years, 1873-1876, and was never caught. They called him the Stone Ghost. They said he could kill in complete darkness from impossible distances. They said he was supernatural. They were wrong about that too. He was just a young man who had spent years mastering a weapon that predated gunpowder by 4,000 years, who understood that fighting the Klan required different tactics than open confrontation, who proved that one person with skill and patience could resist even when the law itself was the enemy. Subscribe, because this is a story about Reconstruction, about resistance, about ancient weapons proving deadly against modern firearms, and about 23 men who learned too late that a motivated freedman with a primitive weapon can be more dangerous than an army with rifles. Marcus Freeman was born enslaved in 1854 in Fulton County, Georgia, about 20 miles south of Atlanta, on the Whitfield Plantation. He was 11 years old when the Civil War ended in 1865, old enough to remember slavery, but young enough to adapt to freedom. His mother, Sarah Freeman, had been a house servant working as a cook. His father's identity was never officially recorded, though Marcus's lighter brown skin showed clear European ancestry. Master Whitfield's son, born from rape that was so common it wasn't even discussed. When freedom came in 1865, Sarah and 11-year-old Marcus left the plantation with nothing but hope. They settled on a small rented plot near Fairburn, Georgia, about 15 miles southwest of Atlanta. Sarah found work as a washerwoman, earning perhaps $2 to $3 per week through brutal labor. Marcus did farm work and odd jobs, earning 25 to 50 cents per day as he grew older. Together they barely survived, but those first years held genuine hope. This was the height of Reconstruction, 1865-1872, when the federal government briefly tried to protect black rights in the South. The Freedmen's Bureau established schools. In 1866, Marcus enrolled in a one-room school in Fairburn, taught by a northern white teacher, Miss Elizabeth Harding. By age 14, Marcus was functionally literate, able to read, write, and calculate. This education would later save his life. Black men could vote. The community built institutions. Mount Zion Baptist Church in Fairburn was constructed in 1867 by freedmen, a simple wooden building that represented their hopes for the future, serving as a center for worship, political organizing, and community gathering. But the backlash was already building. The Ku Klux Klan, founded in Tennessee in 1865 by Confederate veterans, spread rapidly through Georgia by 1868. Their purpose was simple: restore white supremacy through terrorism. They targeted black people who tried to vote, sent children to school, acquired property, or showed any sign of not accepting their proper place. They targeted white Republicans who supported black rights. Their methods: night raids, whippings, mutilations, murders, rapes, arson. They burned schools and churches, assassinated political leaders, left bodies hanging as warnings. In Georgia, hundreds of black people were murdered by the Klan between 1868 and 1876. Thousands more were whipped, beaten, driven from their homes. Local law enforcement rarely intervened because sheriffs, deputies, and judges were often Klan members themselves. The Ku Klux Klan Act of 1871 gave the federal government power to prosecute Klan terrorism, but enforcement was weak and inconsistent, especially in Georgia. By 1870, the hope of early Reconstruction was fading. Marcus learned about the sling by accident in 1869 when he was 15 years old. He was working for a white merchant in Atlanta, loading wagons, when he found a book in a trash pile. Ancient Weapons of Warfare, a historical survey of pre-gunpowder arms, published in Boston in 1858. The merchant let him keep it. That evening, by candlelight, Marcus discovered Chapter 7, Projectile Weapons of the Ancient World. The section on slings was revelatory. The author described the sling as one of the oldest ranged weapons in human history, used by ancient armies from Egypt to Rome. Balearic slingers from Spain's Balearic Islands were recruited by Carthage and Rome because of their incredible skill, beginning training at age 6-7 and practicing for hours daily. The technical details fascinated Marcus. A sling consists of 2 cords connected by a small pouch. The slinger places a projectile in the pouch, holds one cord with a finger loop, grips the other cord, spins the sling to build centrifugal force, then releases the gripped cord to launch the projectile. A skilled slinger could launch a 2-ounce stone at velocities exceeding 100 miles per hour, could fracture human skulls, could kill at distances beyond 100 yards. The weapon required no gunpowder, no expensive materials, just cord, leather, and stones. Marcus read this chapter obsessively. An idea formed. This weapon, ancient and dismissed as primitive, might be exactly what a freedman in Georgia needed. A weapon that could be made from scraps, used with ammunition found on any riverbank, that was silent and would seem harmless to anyone who saw it. In early 1870, Marcus made his first sling using leather scraps and cord. Learning to use it would take years. His first attempts sent stones flying randomly, backward, into the ground, spinning weakly. The problem was timing, releasing the cord at the exact millisecond when the spinning stone aligned with the target. Marcus practiced in secret in the woods along the Chattahoochee River. Early mornings before work, Sunday afternoons, learning in darkness, rain, and wind. His practice regimen was methodical, starting with large targets at short distances and gradually increasing difficulty. The physical demands were substantial. His right shoulder grew visibly larger than his left. His hand developed thick calluses. But after a year of practice, he could hit a man-sized target at 50 feet reliably. After 2 years, he could hit at 70 feet and hit a head-sized target at 50 feet. He also learned to sling at different angles and practiced in various conditions, especially darkness. His ammunition was carefully selected. Smooth river stones, roughly spherical, dense, between 1–2 ounces. By 1873, he had accumulated over 1,000 perfect stones. The trigger for Marcus's campaign came on March 15, 1873. A Saturday evening Marcus would remember perfectly for 50 years. Mount Zion Baptist Church was holding a political meeting focused on voter registration for the upcoming April elections. About 40 people attended, including Sarah Freeman. A white Republican organizer from Atlanta named Robert Shaw was explaining the registration process when the sound of many horses approached at speed. By 8:30 p.m., the church was surrounded. Approximately 30 Klansmen on horseback, firing guns, shouting threats. Marcus recognized voices despite the hoods. Sheriff Thomas Hatcher, Robert Mitchell, who owned the general store, James Bradford, others. These were Fairbairn's respectable white men, now armed and demanding people come out. Someone opened the doors to evacuate before the building was set on fire. The Klan opened fire immediately. William Carson, a church deacon, was shot in the chest as he emerged with hands raised. More shots. People running. Marcus grabbed his mother's hand and ran for the back door, toward the woods 50 yards away. Halfway there, Marcus heard the rifle crack and felt his mother's hand torn from his as she fell. 2 wounds in her back, blood spreading on her dress. She was still breathing when he dropped beside her, shallow, rapid gasps. Her eyes found his. She tried to speak, but only blood came. Her hand gripped his for maybe 5 seconds. Then she was gone. Marcus knelt there holding his mother's body while around him the killing continued. The church was burning. Bodies lay scattered. 7 people died that night. Sarah Freeman, William Carson, and 5 others. 12 more were wounded. The Klan rode away laughing. By morning, Sheriff Hatcher arrived in his official capacity to investigate. His report ruled the deaths as unfortunate result of Negro rioting and subsequent accidental fire. No arrests were made. Marcus buried his mother on March 17, 1873. About 30 people attended the funeral, everyone terrified the Klan might attack again. After the funeral, Marcus stood at his mother's grave alone, thinking about the men who had killed her. He knew their names, their faces, where they lived, what routes they traveled. And he knew something they didn't. He had a weapon they had never heard of and wouldn't recognize as dangerous. On March 18, 1873, Marcus Freeman began planning his first kill. His method was patient and systematic. Marcus understood his strategic reality. He was one person against an organization with hundreds of members. He couldn't defeat the Klan, only hurt it. Open confrontation would be suicide. The Klan had numbers, weapons, and the backing of local law enforcement. The law offered no protection since authorities were Klan members. But he had one advantage: asymmetric warfare capability with a weapon the Klan didn't understand. His strategy: identify individual Klan members when alone and vulnerable. Kill them from distance with his sling, vanish before response. Make deaths look like accidents. Never let them realize they were being systematically hunted. Marcus identified targets by observing the church raid and listening to conversations. In 1873, Fairbairn, many Klansmen didn't hide their affiliation. They bragged openly about teaching Eners a lesson and burning out that agitator church. Marcus listened and remembered. He identified 5 men who had definitely participated in the church burning, including Sheriff Thomas Hatcher, the leader. But Marcus decided to start with secondary targets, saving the church burners for later to avoid alerting them. His first target was Robert Mitchell, the general store owner who had participated in the church raid. Mitchell was in his early 40s, married with 3 children, openly hateful toward black people. Marcus spent 2 weeks observing Mitchell's routines. Every Tuesday and Friday evening, he rode alone from Palmer's Tavern to his farm, passing through woods about half a mile outside town. Marcus chose April 3, 1873, a Tuesday evening. He positioned himself in the woods along Mitchell's route in the late afternoon, 45 yards from the road, behind a fallen log. He wore dark clothing, had his sling and 20 perfect stones, and an escape route planned. He waited 4 hours. At approximately 9:15 p.m., Marcus heard hoofbeats. 1 horse, walking pace. Mitchell came into view, riding relaxed, clearly drunk, whistling. He had no reason to be cautious. This was his road, his county. Marcus stood up smoothly, loaded the stone, began the overhead spin. The familiar whirring sound, One rotation, two rotations. Mitchell was 45 yards away, his head rising and falling with the horse's motion. Marcus released. The stone flew across the space in under 1 second, struck Mitchell on the right temple with tremendous force. Roughly 180 foot-pounds of energy, comparable to a .38 caliber handgun. The impact sounded like an axe hitting wood. Mitchell's head snapped left. His body went limp and he fell from the horse. The horse spooked and galloped toward Mitchell's farm. Mitchell lay motionless in the road. Marcus was already moving, running deeper into the woods, walking in a creek to break his trail. The entire sequence from standing up to being half a mile away took maybe 5 minutes. Mitchell's body was discovered an hour later. He was dead in the road with a fractured skull and a smooth river stone beside him. The death was ruled an accident. Mitchell, drunk, had fallen from his horse and struck his head on a rock. No one seriously considered murder. A gunshot would have been heard. A knife would have left different wounds. The stone in the road supported the accident theory. Marcus attended Mitchell's funeral, watching Mitchell's widow cry, his children confused beside their father's grave. Marcus felt no sympathy. Mitchell had participated in the raid that murdered his mother. That he now left grieving children was unfortunate, but not Marcus's concern. Mitchell had made his choices. What Marcus did feel was clarity. The kill had been successful. He hadn't been caught. The method worked. He could do this again. Marcus waited 6 weeks before his second kill, spacing attacks to avoid creating obvious patterns. His second target was James Bradford, the church burner who farmed 5 miles from Fairburn. Bradford worked alone in his fields for several hours each morning, riding around inspecting crops. Marcus observed him for 2 weeks, learning his patterns. On May 12, 1873, Marcus positioned himself in a tree line before dawn, 60 yards from where Bradford would ride along the northern fence. At 7:45 a.m., Bradford dismounted to inspect a fence post, his back to the woods. Marcus shot from concealment, stone to the back of the head, at the base of his skull. Bradford collapsed instantly, dead before he hit the ground. Marcus was away before anyone discovered the body. This death, coming 5 weeks after Mitchell's similar death, started creating unease among some clan members. 2 members dead from stone impact head wounds in 6 weeks? Most still thought it coincidence, but a few started wondering. Marcus killed 3 more Klansmen in 1873, spacing the attacks months apart. Kill number 3, June 28th. Henry Walsh, courthouse clerk and Klan member. Shot at dusk while riding home from work, 55 yards. Stone to the temple. Ruled accidental fall. Kill number 4, September 8th. Thomas Porter, sawmill owner. Shot in early morning while checking equipment, 50 yards through heavy mist. Stone to jaw. Death within minutes. Ruled accident. Kill number 5, November 15th. David Morgan, farmer known for brutal treatment of black laborers. Shot at dusk while checking livestock, 65 yards. Stone to the back of the head. Instant death. By the end of 1873, 5 white men were dead from stone impact head wounds in 7 months. The deaths were spread across different locations and circumstances, making connections difficult. But the Klan's November meeting discussed the mysterious deaths. Some argued coincidence. Others suspected federal agents or black resistance fighters. No one considered one person with a sling. It seemed impossible. The psychological impact was already visible. Members were more cautious about traveling alone, varied their routes. Some wore extra padding. Marcus observed all this and adjusted his tactics accordingly, taking longer range shots and waiting for better opportunities. 1874 brought escalation, Marcus killed 6 more Klansmen that year, becoming more confident and taking more difficult shots. He was also starting to target more prominent Klan members, including leaders and particularly violent individuals. The most dramatic kill of 1874, and perhaps of Marcus's entire campaign, was the assassination of William Carson on June 15, 1874. Carson was a major Klan leader in Fulton County, a wealthy landowner who had organized multiple raids and was known to have personally murdered at least 3 black men. He was also one of the church burners, one of Marcus's primary targets. Carson was giving a speech at a white supremacist rally in Fairburn on June 15th. A Sunday afternoon gathering of maybe 300 white people in a field outside town. The rally was semi-public, with families attending, children playing. Carson was on a wooden platform, giving a speech about the necessity of maintaining white rule through force. He was flanked by other Klan leaders and protected by armed guards around the platform perimeter. This was an incredibly difficult and dangerous target. Carson was surrounded by hundreds of people in daylight. Guards were watching for threats. Any attack would immediately reveal Marcus's position and likely result in his capture or death. But Marcus had been thinking about this problem for weeks, and he had a plan. The rally field was bordered by a tree line about 80 yards from the speaking platform. Marcus positioned himself in those trees in the early morning, hours before the rally began. He climbed 20 feet up into a large oak tree, positioning himself on a thick branch that gave him a clear line of sight to where the platform would be. He wore dark clothing that blended with the tree bark. He had his sling and 10 carefully selected stones. He had scouted this position days earlier and knew his escape route. Climb down the back side of the tree, drop to the ground, run 50 yards deeper into the woods where he had a horse concealed, ride hard in the opposite direction from the rally. The risk was enormous. But Carson was too important a target to pass up, and his security was always tight. This rally might be Marcus's best chance. The rally began around 2 p.m. Carson spoke for about 30 minutes, his voice carrying clearly across the field. Marcus waited, watching through the leaves, calculating the distance, about 80 yards, at the extreme range of his capability. Accounting for the slight breeze, preparing mentally for the shot. Carson was a moving target, gesturing as he spoke, pacing slightly on the platform. But his movements were somewhat predictable. He would make a point, pause for emphasis, gesture with his right hand. At approximately 2:35 p.m., Carson paused in his speech to take a drink of water. He stood still on the platform, tilted his head back to drink. Maybe 3 seconds of being perfectly stationary. Marcus loaded a stone, began his overhead spin, built maximum velocity. This was the longest shot he'd attempted against a human target. He released at the exact moment when Carson's throat was aligned with the trajectory. The stone flew 80 yards in about 0.8 seconds. It hit Carson in the throat with tremendous force, crushing his windpipe and fracturing his cervical vertebrae. Carson dropped the water glass, grabbed his throat with both hands, staggered backward. Blood poured from his mouth. He collapsed on the platform, dying in front of the entire rally crowd. Chaos erupted. People screamed. Guards rushed to Carson. Others pulled weapons and started scanning for threats. Someone shouted, "Sniper!" and the crowd panicked, running in all directions. Armed men began firing randomly into the tree line where they thought a shooter might be hidden. Marcus was already moving. He climbed down the back of the tree quickly but carefully, dropped the last 8 feet to the ground, ran to where his horse was tied, mounted, and rode hard through the woods, away from the rally. Behind him, he could hear gunfire, shouting, horses being mobilized to search the woods. But he had a head start and knew the terrain. He rode for about 3 miles through forested areas where pursuit on horseback was difficult. then emerged onto a road and rode normally toward his cabin. Just another black man on horseback. The aftermath of Carson's death was significant. The Klan leadership was now convinced they were under systematic attack. Carson's death couldn't be explained as an accident. He'd been killed in front of hundreds of witnesses at a guarded rally. Someone had assassinated him from distance with incredible precision. The projectile recovered from the platform near Carson's body was a smooth river stone, same as had been found near other victims. The Klan held emergency meetings to discuss the threat. Their internal communications, discovered in archives decades later, showed genuine fear and confusion. Who was attacking them? How were these attacks being conducted? Some members thought it was federal agents with some new weapon. Others suspected an organized black resistance group funded by Northern abolitionists. The idea that it was one person with a sling never seriously occurred to them. The weapon was too primitive. The level of skill required seemed impossible. The Klan response was to increase security and escalate violence. Leaders now traveled with multiple guards. Members varied their routes and schedules. They conducted more raids on black communities, hoping to terrorize people into revealing information about the Stone Ghost, the name they'd given to their unseen attacker. These retaliatory raids killed dozens of innocent black people over the next year. People who had nothing to do with Marcus's campaign but suffered because of Klan paranoia. Marcus continued his campaign through 1874, despite the increased caution. His kills that year. Kill number 7, August 5, 1874. Target, Samuel Harris, Klan member who operated a store that refused to serve black customers and who had participated in multiple whipping raids. Marcus killed Harris at dawn while Harris was unloading supplies behind his store. Shot from 45 yards, stoned to the temple, instant death. Kill number 8, September 20th, 1874. Target, John Taylor, farmer and Klan member known for burning black homes. Marcus killed Taylor while Taylor was working alone in his tobacco field. Shot from 70 yards, stoned to the back of the head. Kill number 9, October 30th, 1874. Target, Richard Moore, Klan member who worked as a deputy sheriff under Sheriff Hatcher and who had participated in the church burning. This was one of Marcus's primary targets. Marcus killed Moore at dusk while Moore was riding home from work. Shot from 50 yards. Stoned to the jaw, killing Moore within minutes. Kill 10, November 25th, 1874. Target, Frank Thompson, mill owner and Klan member. Marcus killed Thompson while Thompson was inspecting his property. Shot from 60 yards through heavy morning fog. Stoned to the back of the head. Kill number 11, December 18th, 1874. Target, Christopher Lee, farmer and Klan member who had whipped multiple black workers on his property. Marcus killed Lee while Lee was feeding livestock at dusk. Shot from 55 yards, stoned to the temple. By the end of 1874, 11 Klansmen were dead. The psychological impact on the Klan was severe. Members who had once operated with complete confidence were now genuinely afraid. They couldn't identify their attacker, couldn't predict when or where the next attack would come, couldn't defend against a weapon they didn't understand. Some members quit the Klan entirely, deciding the risk wasn't worth it. Others moved to different counties or states. Klan recruitment dropped significantly. Potential members heard stories about the Stone Ghost and decided joining the Klan might be a death sentence. 1875 brought 7 more kills, as Marcus systematically worked through his target list. Kill number 12, January 20th, 1875. Target, Edward Wilson, Klan member and courthouse clerk who had helped falsify documents to cheat black landowners out of their property. Marcus killed Wilson at dawn while Wilson was walking to work. Shot from 40 yards. Stoned to the forehead. Kill number 13, March 8, 1875. Target: Andrew Scott, farmer and Klan member. Marcus killed Scott while Scott was working in his barn, shot from 50 yards through the open barn door, stoned to the temple. Kill 14, April 15, 1875. Target: Joseph Taylor, Klan member who owned a blacksmith shop. Marcus killed Taylor while Taylor was shoeing a horse outside his shop at dawn, shot from 55 yards, stoned to the back of the head. Kill March 15, June 3, 1875. Target: Daniel Harris, Klan member and one of the church burners, another primary target. Marcus killed Harris while Harris was riding home from a Klan meeting late at night. Shot from 60 yards in darkness, one of Marcus's most difficult kills, requiring him to aim by sound and memory of the terrain. Stoned to the side of the head. Kill 16, July 22, 1875. Target: Peter Evans, Klan member who worked as an overseer on a large plantation known for brutal treatment of black workers. Marcus killed Evans while Evans was inspecting cotton fields. Shot from 65 yards, stoned to the jaw. Kill number 17, September 10, 1875. Target: Michael Brown, Klan member and saloon owner who had participated in multiple raids. Marcus killed Brown at dusk while Brown was closing his saloon. Shot from 50 yards, stoned to the temple. Kill number 18, November 5, 1875. Target: George Miller, Klan member, farmer, and one of the church burners, another primary target. Marcus killed Miller while Miller was checking fence lines at his property. Shot from 70 yards, stoned to the back of the head. By late 1875, 18 Klansmen were dead. The Klan in Fulton County and surrounding areas was in disarray. Operations were disrupted. Fear was pervasive. Members traveled in groups and still died. They wore padding and still died. They hired guards and still died. The stone ghost seemed unstoppable, supernatural, everywhere and nowhere. An elderly freedman named Isaiah Brooks, one of the few people who had observed Marcus practicing years earlier, approached Marcus in late 1875. They had a brief conversation that Marcus would remember for the rest of his life. Isaiah said simply, "I know what you're doing. I won't say nothing. But be careful. They're killing everyone looking for you. And what you're doing matters, but it has costs." Marcus nodded. They never discussed it again. Isaiah died in 1877, taking his knowledge to the grave. By early 1876, Marcus had killed 18 Klansmen over nearly 3 years. But the men most directly responsible for his mother's death, the church burners, were not all dead yet. Of the original raid participants that Marcus had positively identified, several remained alive. Sheriff Thomas Hatcher, the raid leader, and 4 others. Marcus had already killed William Carson, June 1874, George Miller, November 1875, Daniel Harris, June 1875, and James Bradford, May 1873, his second kill ever. The remaining church burners were David Clark, John White, Robert Davis, Andrew Mitchell, and Sheriff Thomas Hatcher. The psychological impact on the Klan was severe. Members who had once rode boldly in the open now traveled in groups, avoided being alone, varied their routes. Some Klansmen left Georgia entirely, moving to other states where mysterious stone deaths weren't occurring. Klan recruitment declined because potential members heard stories about the stone ghost and decided the risk wasn't worth it. But the Klan also increased their violence against black communities, conducting vicious retaliatory raids that killed dozens of innocent people. Marcus understood that his campaign had costs beyond the Klansmen he killed. Every action produces reactions. The Klan's paranoia and rage harmed people who had nothing to do with his attacks. Between late 1874 and early 1876, Klan retaliatory violence in Fulton County killed an estimated 40 to 50 black people. People who were tortured for information they didn't have about the stone ghost. People who were murdered to send messages. People who simply were in the wrong place when Klan members needed to take out their fear and frustration. This weighed on Marcus heavily. He would think about the widow whose husband was hanged because the Klan suspected he knew something about the stone ghost. He would think about the children who watched their father beaten to death in a search for information. He understood that his resistance created cascading violence that hurt innocent people. But he didn't stop. His reasoning: the Klan was conducting terror campaigns anyway. Whether he fought back or not, they were burning, raping, murdering. The violence against black communities was constant, predating his campaign and continuing regardless of what he did. At least his actions gave the Klan something to fear, created some cost for their terrorism, demonstrated that black people could resist. And most importantly to Marcus, the men who killed his mother deserved to die, and he was the only person who could deliver that justice. In March 1876, exactly 3 years after his mother's murder, Marcus decided to complete his primary mission. He would kill the 5 surviving church burners in rapid succession, a risky deviation from his usual pattern of spacing attacks. But Marcus was planning to leave Georgia afterward anyway. He had accomplished what he set out to do: avenge his mother, cost the Klan heavily, create fear among terrorists. Continuing indefinitely would eventually lead to his capture. Better to finish his primary targets and escape while he still could. Kill Derver 19, March 8, 1876. Target: David Clark, church burner, farmer who worked about 8 miles from Fairburn. Clark was in his late 30s, owned 150 acres, employed black sharecroppers whom he treated brutally. Marcus had been observing Clark for weeks, learning his routines. Clark walked to his barn every morning at dawn to feed livestock, a predictable pattern. On March 8th, Marcus positioned himself in a wooded area 45 yards from Clark's barn before dawn. When Clark emerged from his house and walked toward the barn in the gray pre-sunrise light, Marcus shot from his concealed position, stone to the temple. Clark dropped instantly, dead before his body hit the ground. Marcus was away before anyone discovered the body. Kill 20, March 15, 1876. Target: John White, church burner, merchant who owned a dry goods store in Fairburn. White was more cautious than Clark, always armed, usually accompanied by family or employees. But Marcus identified one vulnerability. Every morning, White arrived at his store before his employees, spending maybe 15 minutes alone while he unlocked, lit lamps, and prepared for the day. The store backed onto an alley with a wooded area beyond. On March 15th, Marcus positioned himself in those woods at dawn, 50 yards from the store's back door. When White came out to the alley to throw out trash, a routine Marcus had observed multiple times, Marcus shot. Stone to the back of the head. White collapsed in the alley, dead within minutes. Marcus vanished before anyone responded to the sound of White's fall. Kill 21, March 20th, 1876. Target: Robert Davis, church burner, mill operator who ran a lumber mill about 6 miles from Fairburn. Davis was paranoid by this point. 2 church burners dead in 12 days was clearly a pattern. Davis hired armed guards, varied his schedule, wore padding. But everyone has routines that emerge over time. Marcus observed that Davis inspected his mill machinery every morning between 6 to 7 a.m., usually alone for at least part of that time while his guards waited outside. On March 20th, Marcus positioned himself in woods 55 yards from the mill's inspection area. When Davis was alone, examining a saw blade with his back to the woods, Marcus shot. Stone to the jaw, traveling at such velocity that it shattered Davis's jaw, drove bone fragments into his throat and brain. Davis collapsed, dying within minutes from the catastrophic head trauma. Marcus was away before the guards discovered the body. Kill 22, March 23, 1876. Target: Andrew Mitchell, no relation to Robert Mitchell from Kill 101, church burner, farmer. Mitchell had gone into hiding after Davis's death, sleeping at different locations, traveling only with armed escorts. But Marcus tracked him patiently. Mitchell was hiding at a cousin's farm about 10 miles from Fairburn. Marcus observed the farm for 2 days, identifying patterns. On the evening of March 23rd, Mitchell went to the farm's outhouse at dusk, a brief moment alone, about 40 yards from the woods. Marcus shot as Mitchell was returning from the outhouse to the main house. Stone to the side of the head, Mitchell fell dead in the yard. By the time the guards responded, Marcus was deep in the woods, moving toward his horse, gone. These 4 kills in 15 days created absolute panic among the remaining clan leadership. They understood the pattern. Church burners were being systematically eliminated. Sheriff Thomas Hatcher was the only survivor of the original raid leadership, and he knew he was next. Hatcher's response was to go into maximum security mode. He slept in a different location every night, never announcing where until the last minute. He traveled with 3-4 armed guards at all times. He wore a thick leather vest and sometimes wore a crude metal helmet fashioned from a large pot. Looking ridiculous, but potentially effective against stone impacts. He varied his routes completely, never taking the same path twice in a row. He conducted his sheriff duties from secure locations, avoiding being in the open. Marcus observed Hatcher for a week, looking for any vulnerability. Hatcher's security was genuinely impressive for a small-town sheriff in 1876. But everyone has patterns, and Marcus eventually found Hatcher's. Once per week, Hatcher would inspect his property, a 40-acre farm about 3 miles from Fairburn that Hatcher owned but wasn't living on. He was rotating through different safe houses for security. Hatcher would arrive at the property in late afternoon with his guards, inspect the fields and buildings, then leave before dark. The property was isolated, bordered by dense pine woods on 2 sides. Marcus understood this might be his only opportunity. Hatcher might change even this routine after the recent kills, or might increase security further, or might leave Georgia entirely. Marcus had to act now. On March 27, 1876, Marcus positioned himself in those pine woods in the early morning, hours before Hatcher would likely arrive. He found a position about 55 yards from a section of fence that Hatcher always checked during his inspections. Marcus had observed this twice over the past week and confirmed it by talking to black farmhands who worked nearby farms. The position gave Marcus clear sight lines and a good escape route deeper into the woods toward a creek about 200 yards away. Marcus waited. 6 hours in the same position, barely moving, controlling his breathing, staying absolutely still. This was the culmination of 3 years of work. The last church burner, the man who had led the raid that killed his mother, the corrupt sheriff who had ruled those murders as Negro rioting. Marcus's mind was clear and focused. He felt no rage, no emotional agitation, just cold purpose. Hatcher arrived around 4 p.m. with 3 guards, heavily armed men who clearly knew their job. They rode around the property checking different sections. The guards were vigilant, constantly scanning the tree lines, hands on their weapons. Hatcher wore his leather vest and had pistols on both hips. He looked nervous, paranoid, checking over his shoulder frequently. They seemed to be concluding their inspection without incident. Marcus thought perhaps Hatcher wouldn't present a shot. But then Hatcher dismounted to examine the fence post. The same one he'd checked before, apparently something that needed ongoing attention. The guards remained mounted about 20 yards away, facing different directions to cover all approaches. Standard security procedure. But it meant their attention was divided. Hatcher bent over the fence post, examining the wood, his head lowered, focused on the task. His leather vest covered his torso but left his head exposed. He was presenting his head as a target for maybe 8 to 10 seconds. Marcus had been waiting in position for 6 hours. His muscles were cramped, his back ached, his legs had gone numb. But when Hatcher bent over that fence post, Marcus's training took over completely. He rose smoothly, loaded his last good stone, a perfect 2-ounce river stone he'd been saving specifically for this moment. Began the overhead spin. The guards were looking wrong directions. Hatcher was focused on the fence. Marcus built maximum velocity, released at peak spin. The stone flew 55 yards in approximately half a second. It struck Hatcher on the right side of his head, just above and behind the ear, with devastating force. Roughly 200 foot-pounds of kinetic energy delivered to a point about 1 inch in diameter. Hatcher's skull fractured catastrophically, the impact driving bone fragments deep into his brain, severing critical blood vessels and destroying brain tissue. Hatcher collapsed sideways against the fence, already dead or dying, his body settling into the Georgia dirt he had terrorized so many people on. The guards shouted and spurred their horses toward the tree line, drawing weapons, firing into the woods. But Marcus was already running, moving through the forest along his pre-planned escape route. The guards pursued on horseback, but Marcus had chosen his position specifically because the woods were too thick for effective mounted pursuit. The guards crashed through brush, firing blindly, shouting for Marcus to stop. But Marcus was 100 yards away, then 200, then at the creek where he'd hidden supplies days earlier. He used the creek to break his trail, walking in the water for half a mile, emerged on the far bank, continued through different woods, eventually reached a road about 2 miles from Hatcher's property. By the time he walked calmly back toward his cabin, just another black man on a public road. The guards were still searching the woods near where he'd shot from. Sheriff Thomas Hatcher was found dead by his guards within seconds of being killed, surrounded by armed men on his own property, despite every security precaution he'd taken. A smooth river stone lay near his body, the 23rd such stone found beside a dead Klansman in 3 years. The signature of the Stone Ghost, the mark of Marcus Freeman's 3-year campaign of revenge and resistance. Kill Thamur 23, March 27, 1876. Sheriff Thomas Hatcher, church burner, raid leader, corrupt lawman, the man most directly responsible for Sarah Freeman's death. Dead at age 44 from a stone thrown by her 22-year-old son. Justice delivered after exactly 3 years and 12 days. Marcus walked home that evening knowing this had to be his final kill in Georgia. Killing a sheriff would bring federal investigation, would intensify the manhunt beyond anything previous. Local authorities might have been complicit with the Klan, but federal authorities would investigate a sheriff's murder seriously. And more importantly, Marcus had completed his mission. The 5 primary church burners were dead. Bradford, May 1873, Carson, June 1874, Harris, June 1875, Miller, November 1875, and now Hatcher, March 1876. He had also killed 18 other Klansmen who had participated in terror campaigns against black communities. He had created 3 years of fear and disruption for the Klan. He had proved that resistance was possible, that black people could fight back effectively even when the law provided no protection. But Georgia was no longer safe for Marcus, if it ever had been. The investigation into Hatcher's death would be thorough. Federal authorities would actually get involved this time. The Klan would be conducting desperate, vicious searches for the Stone Ghost. Marcus needed to leave immediately, before the net closed. In April 1876, Marcus Freeman left Georgia. He traveled north to Ohio, then to Michigan, settling in Detroit in May 1876. He changed his name to Mark Stone, claimed to be a freedman from North Carolina, and never mentioned Georgia again. He worked as a laborer, a carpenter, eventually opened a small furniture shop. He married in 1878, had 3 children, lived quietly. Marcus died in Detroit in 1923 at age 69 from pneumonia. On his deathbed, he told his oldest son, Thomas Stone, the truth about Georgia, about the sling, about the 23 Klansmen. He described each kill in detail, the dates, the names, the distances, the methods. He wanted someone to know that resistance had been possible, that one person fighting back had mattered. Thomas Stone wrote down his father's confession, but kept it private for decades. In 1954, during the early civil rights movement, Thomas's daughter, Marcus's granddaughter, donated the written confession to the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture in New York. The confession included specific names, dates, and locations that historians were able to verify against Reconstruction-era records. The verification was shocking. 23 men in Fulton County, Georgia, and surrounding areas had indeed died between 1873-1876 from blunt force trauma to the head caused by stone impacts. The deaths had been documented in coroner's reports, newspaper articles, and Klan internal communications, discovered in archives decades later. The Klan's own records showed their paranoia about the stone ghost, their failed attempts to identify the killer, their growing fear of this unseen threat. Modern analysis has confirmed the plausibility of Marcus's account. Ballistics experts have verified that skilled slingers can achieve the ranges and power described. Historical records confirm the Klan was particularly active and violent in Georgia during this period. The timeline matches. The methods are consistent with ancient sling warfare tactics adapted to guerrilla resistance. What makes Marcus's campaign remarkable is not just the body count, but the psychological warfare. He created an atmosphere of fear among Klansmen who had previously operated with complete impunity. He demonstrated that resistance was possible even when the law provided no protection. He proved that ancient weapons in skilled hands could be as effective as modern firearms for asymmetric warfare. The moral complexity of Marcus's story is important to acknowledge. The 23 men he killed were terrorists who participated in campaigns of murder, rape, and arson against black communities. They were evil by any reasonable standard. But they were also human beings with families, and their deaths caused suffering beyond themselves. Marcus killed in defense of his community and in revenge for his mother. But killing always creates harm. Marcus wrestled with this complexity. According to his son's account, Marcus had nightmares about the killings for years. He never regretted what he did. He believed it was necessary and just. But he never forgot the weight of taking 23 lives. He told his son, "I killed evil men doing evil work. But killing changes you. You carry those deaths, every face, every name. I carried 23 for 47 years." The ancient sling, the weapon Marcus used, is one of humanity's oldest ranged weapons. Archaeological evidence shows slings were used 10,000 years ago. They appear in ancient Mesopotamian texts, biblical accounts, Greek and Roman military records. The weapon's simplicity, 2 cords, a leather pouch, and stones, disguises its lethality. A skilled slinger can launch a 2-ounce stone at over 100 mph, delivering enough energy at 50 to 70 yards to fracture human skulls and cause instant death. The technique requires extensive training. The slinger holds one cord, usually with a loop around the finger, grips the other cord, places a stone in the leather pouch, spins the sling overhead or sidearm to build momentum, then releases the gripped cord at the exact moment when the stone is aligned with the target. Achieving accuracy requires thousands of practice shots, developing muscle memory and instinctive understanding of trajectory and timing. Marcus had this training. 3 years of obsessive practice 1870, 1873, before his first kill. Tens of thousands of practice shots. Perfect stones selected from rivers and streams, sorted by weight and size. Knowledge of ballistics learned from his book and from experience. By 1873, Marcus was as skilled with a sling as expert riflemen were with their weapons. Perhaps more so because his weapon was silent, required no ammunition resupply, and was never recognized as a threat. The historical context of Marcus's campaign matters deeply. The Reconstruction era, 1865-1877, was a period of enormous hope and terrible violence. Newly freed black people tried to build lives, establish communities, participate in democracy. The Ku Klux Klan and similar groups waged terrorist campaigns to destroy these efforts and restore white supremacy. In Georgia specifically, Klan violence was severe. Between 1868 and 1876, hundreds of black people were murdered by the Klan. Thousands more were whipped, raped, driven from their homes. Schools were burned, churches destroyed, political leaders assassinated. Local law enforcement rarely intervened because they were complicit. Many sheriffs, judges, and police were Klan members. Federal intervention was limited and inconsistent. The Ku Klux Klan Act of 1871 gave the federal government power to prosecute Klan terrorism, and there were some successful prosecutions in South Carolina and other states. But enforcement was uneven, and by the mid-1870s, federal commitment was waning as Northern political will to protect black rights diminished. This was the context in which Marcus operated. He had no legal recourse. The sheriff who should have investigated his mother's murder was the Klan member who had protected the murderers. Federal authorities were distant and unreliable. Armed resistance through open confrontation would be suicide. The Klan had numbers, weapons, and the backing of local power structures. So Marcus chose asymmetric warfare. One person, operating in secret, using an unconventional weapon, targeting Klan members individually when they were vulnerable. This was rational guerrilla tactics adapted to his specific circumstances. The psychological impact of Marcus's campaign extended beyond the 23 deaths. Klan members in the Fairburn area became genuinely afraid. Their internal communications, discovered in archives, show escalating paranoia throughout 1874-1875. They implemented security measures, traveling in groups, wearing armor, varying routes, that reduced their operational effectiveness. Some members quit the Klan entirely. Recruitment declined. This mattered because the Klan's power depended on their ability to terrorize black communities with impunity. When Klan members themselves became afraid, when they had to worry about being hunted rather than freely hunting others, their psychological advantage eroded. Marcus couldn't destroy the Klan. He was one person against a massive organization. But he could make them afraid in one region, disrupt their operations, increase the cost of their terrorism. The 23 Klansmen Marcus killed had names: Robert Mitchell, James Bradford, William Carson, Thomas Hatcher, and 19 others whose names were documented in Marcus's confession. They were farmers, merchants, a sheriff, a town clerk, respectable members of white society who participated in terrorism at night. Their deaths were explained as accidents or mysterious attacks by unknown assailants. No one was ever charged. Marcus was never suspected. Marcus's escape to Detroit and his subsequent life there reflect a pattern common among freedmen who left the South during and after Reconstruction. Detroit had a growing black community, industrial jobs that paid wages, and significantly less racial violence than the South. Marcus built a normal life there. Married, had children, ran a business, participated in his community. By all outward appearances, He was just another freedman who had migrated north for better opportunities. Only his family knew the truth about Georgia, and they kept the secret for nearly 80 years until the confession was donated to the Schomburg Center in 1954. The timing was significant. The civil rights movement was beginning, and Marcus's granddaughter felt his story of resistance would inspire a new generation fighting against continued oppression. The confession created interest, but also controversy. Some historians doubted that one person could kill 23 Klansmen over 3 years with a primitive weapon and never be caught. But the documentation was compelling. Marcus's confession included specific details, dates, names, locations, methods that matched historical records. The Klan's own internal documents confirmed mysterious deaths and their paranoia about the stone ghost. Coroner's reports from the 1870s showed deaths from stone impact head trauma. The evidence supported Marcus's account. Modern understanding of ancient weapons and guerrilla warfare makes Marcus's success more plausible. We now know that skilled slingers can achieve remarkable accuracy and power. We understand asymmetric warfare tactics and how small-scale operations can have disproportionate psychological impact. We recognize that individuals with specific skills and knowledge of terrain can operate effectively against larger forces. Marcus Freeman's story is not unique in demonstrating Black resistance during Reconstruction, but it is unusual in its specific methods and its documentation. Most Reconstruction-era resistance was undocumented, its practitioners unnamed and forgotten. Marcus's story survived because he confessed on his deathbed, and his family preserved that confession for decades until they felt it could safely be shared. The sling Marcus used is lost to history, likely discarded or destroyed when he left Georgia. But similar ancient slings exist in museums worldwide. Simple artifacts that seem primitive until you understand their true capabilities. The stones Marcus selected from Georgia rivers are scattered somewhere in Detroit, where he brought them as reminders of what he'd done and what he'd survived. Remember Marcus Freeman. Remember that he was 15 when he learned about the sling from a discarded book. Remember that he trained for 3 years before his first kill, practicing thousands of hours, developing impossible skill. Remember that the Klan murdered his mother in a church burning, and the local sheriff called it a riot. Remember that Marcus killed 23 Klansmen over 3 years and was never caught. Remember that he lived 47 years in freedom after leaving Georgia, raised a family, died in his own bed. Remember that ancient weapons in skilled hands remain deadly. Remember that resistance was possible even during the darkest periods. Remember that one person fighting back mattered. 23 stones. 23 dead Klansmen. One freedman who refused to be terrorized and proved that even the Ku Klux Klan could be hunted. That's the story. That's the truth. That's the legend of Marcus Freeman, the stone ghost of Georgia, who fought the Klan with a weapon older than civilization and walked away free.